All right, we are reading The Eagle by Rosemary Sutcliff. We are in chapter 6 called Eska. This is where things get really interesting. If you watched the trailer to the movie, you will see almost one of the scenes in the trailer, essentially in this chapter today. So we're getting to some interesting things here. And if you remember at the in chapter 5, he went to not the Coliseum, but where they had the British games, and he essentially helped save one of the fighters who was probably going to lose his life, who was going to lose his life, and he goes and decides to buy him as a slave. So the name of this chapter, so I'll just speak up so much, I'm moving closer, is Eska. Okay. The purchase was arranged next day, without much difficulty, for although the price that Marcus could afford was not large, Beppo, the master of the circus slaves, knew well enough that he was not likely to get a better one for a beaten gladiator. So, after a little haggling, the bargain was struck, and that evening, after dinner, Stephanos went to fetch home the new slave. Marcus waited for their return alone in the atrium, for Uncle Aquila had retired to his watchtower study to work out a particularly absorbing problem in siege warfare. He had been trying to read his uncle's copy of the Georgics, but his thoughts kept wandering from Virgil on beekeeping to the encounter before him. He was wondering, for the first time, he had not thought to wonder before, why the fate of a slave gladiator he had never met before he had never before set eyes on, should matter to him so nearly. But it did matter. Maybe it was like calling to like, and yet it was hard to see quite what he had in common with the barbarian slave. Presently his listening ear caught the sound of an arrival in the slave's quarters, and he laid down the papyrus roll and turned toward the doorway. Steps came along the colonnade, and two figures appeared on the threshold. "Centurion Marcus, I have brought the new slave," said Stephanos, and stepped discreetly back into the night, and the new slave walked forward to the foot of Marcus's couch and stood there. For a long moment the two young men looked at each other, alone in the empty lamplit atrium as yesterday they had been alone in the crowded amphitheater, while the scuffling of Stephanos' sandals died away down the colonnade. "So it is you," the slave said at last. "Yes, it is I." The silence began again, and again the slave broke it. "Why did you turn the purpose of the crowd yesterday?" "I did not ask for mercy." "Possibly that was why." The slave hesitated, and then said defiantly, "I was afraid yesterday. I, who have been a warrior. I was afraid to choke out my life in the fisher's net." "I know," Marcus said, "but still you did not ask for mercy." The other's eyes were fixed on his face, a little puzzled. "Why have you brought me here?" "Why have you bought me?" "I have need of a body slave." "Surely the arena is an unusual place to pick one." "But then I wished for an unusual body slave." Marcus looked up with the merest quirk of a smile into the sullen gray eyes fixed so unswervingly on his own. "Not one like Stephanos, that has been a slave all his life, and is therefore nothing more." It was an odd conversation between master and slave, but neither of them was thinking that. I have been but 2 years a slave," said the other quietly. "And before that you were a warrior. And your name?" "I am Eska, son of Canoval of the tribe of Brigantes, the bearers of the blue war shield." "And I was a centurion of auxiliaries in the 2nd Legion," Marcus said, not knowing quite why he made the reply, knowing only that it had to be made. Roman and Briton faced each other in the lamplight, while the two statements seemed to hang like a challenge in the air between them. Then Eska put out a hand unconsciously and touched the edge of the couch. "That I know, for the goaty one, Stephanos told me, and also that my master has been wounded. I am sorry for that." "Thank you," Marcus said. Eska looked down at his own hand on the edge of the couch, and then up again. "It would have been easy to escape on my way here," he said slowly. "The old goaty one could not have held me back if I had chosen to break for freedom. But I chose to go with him because it was in my heart that it might be you that we went to." and if it had been another after all, then I should have escaped later to the wilds where my clipped ear would not betray me. There are still free tribes beyond the frontiers. And as he spoke, he drew from the breast of his rough tunic, where it had lain against his skin, a slender knife, which he handled as tenderly as if it had been a thing living and beloved. I had this to my release. And now, Marcus said, not giving a glance to the narrow, deadly thing. For a moment the sullenness lifted from Eska's face. He leaned forward and let the dagger fall with a little clatter on the inlaid table at Marcus's side. I am the centurion's hound, to lie at the centurion's feet, he said. So basically he's telling Marcus, look, I could have easily escaped on my way here, truthfully. The only reason I didn't is because I thought it might be you who had purchased my freedom, or not purchased my freedom, but purchased me as a slave. And he holds out this dagger and drops it and shows him, hey, essentially, you saved my life. You didn't have to, but you did. So I'm guessing, the unsaid statement here is, so therefore, the metaphor is, I am your hound. I will sit at your heel, at your feet, and do as you bid. And he's not saying out of gratitude, but his inner conscious. Alright, so Eska joined the household and, carrying the spear that marked him for a personal slave and superior to mere household slaves, stood behind Marcus's couch at meals to pour wine for him, fetched and carried, and saw to his belongings, and slept on a mattress out across his door at night. He made a very good body slave, so good that Marcus guessed him to have been somebody's armor-bearer in the days before his ear was clipped, a father's or an elder brother's, perhaps, after the custom of the tribes. He never asked about those days, nor how Eska had come into the Khalifa arena, because something about his slave, some inner reserve, warned him that to ask would be an intrusion, a walking in without leave. One day, perhaps, Eska would tell him freely, but not yet. The weeks went by, and suddenly the rose bushes in the courtyard were gemmed with swelling leaf buds, and the air had a sense of quickening that was the first distant promise of spring. So remember, he came to his Uncle Aquila's in October. So, and then, shortly after Christmas, he went and saw, this slave fight. And now he's been there for a few months. Leaf buds, slowly, very slowly, Marcus's leg was mending. It no longer woke him with a stab of pain every time he turned in the night, and he could hobble round the house more and more easily. As time passed, he got into the way of leaving his stick behind him and walking with a hand on Eska's shoulder instead. It seemed natural to do that, for without quite realizing it, he was slipping more and more often from the master to the friend in his dealings with Eska. Though, after that first night, Eska never for an instant forgot the slave in his dealings with Marcus. That winter, there was a lot of trouble with, so now we've sped up all the way to winter. There's a lot of trouble with wolves in the district, driven out from their fastnesses by hunger. They hunted under the very walls of Khalifa, and often Marcus would hear their long-drawn cry in the night, setting every dog in the town baying in that frenzy that was half hate and half longing, half enemy hurling defiance at enemy, half kin calling to kin. In the outlying farms of the forest clearings, lambing pens were attacked, and anxious men kept the wolf guard every night. At a village a few miles away, a pony was killed. At another, a baby was taken. Oh. Then one day, Eska, going into the town on an errand for Marcus, returned with news of a countrywide wolf hunt planned for next day. It had started simply among the outlying farms, desperate to save their lambing ewes, then gathered to itself professional hunters and a couple of young officers from the transit camp out for a day's sport. And now it seemed that half the countryside was out to end the menace. He poured it all out to Marcus. The hunters were to meet at such a place 2 hours before sunrise. At such another place, they were going to drive the thickets with dogs and torches, and Marcus laid aside the belt he was mending and listened to him, as eager to hear as his slave was to tell. Now remember, when he was watching him fight the other guy, he wondered if he had been a hunter before because of how fast and determined he was while chasing the fisher. Listening, he longed to be off on that wolf hunt and run the spring fret out of his bones, and he knew that the same longing was hot in his slave. For him, it did not seem likely that there would be any more hunting, but that was no reason why there should be none for Eska. Eska, he said abruptly when the other had told all there was to tell, it would surely be a good thing if you joined this wolf hunt. Eska's whole face lit with eagerness, but after a moment he said it would mean maybe a night and a day that the centurion must do without his slave. I shall do well enough, Marcus told him. I should borrow half of Stephanos from my uncle. But what will you do for spears? I left my own for the man who came after me at Iska. Else you could have had those. If my master is sure, really sure, I know where I can borrow spears. Good. Do you go and borrow them now. So Eska borrowed the spears he needed, and in the pitch black of that night Marcus heard him get up and collect them from the corner where they had been stacked. He turned on his elbow and spoke into the darkness. You are going now? A light footfall and a sense of movement told him that Eska was standing at his side. Yes, if the centurion is still sure, quite sure, perfectly sure. Go and spear your wolf. It is in my heart that I wish the centurion came too. Oh, that's sweet, Eska said in a rush. Maybe I'll come another year, Marcus said sleepily. Good hunting, Eska. For an instant a dark shape showed in the lesser darkness of the doorway, and then it was gone, and he lay listening, not at all sleepily now, to the quick light footfall dying away along the colonnade. In the gray of the next dawn he heard the footfall returning, a little heavier than at setting out, and the dark shape looming again into the cobweb pallor of the doorway. Eska, how went the hunting? The hunting was good, Eska said. He stacked the spears with a slight clatter against the wall, and came and bent over the cot, and Marcus saw there was something curled in the crook of his arm under the rough cloak. I have brought back the fruits of my hunting for the centurion, he said, and set the thing down on the blanket. It was alive and being disturbed. It whimpered, and Marcus' gently exploring hand discovered that it was warm and harshly furry. Eska! A wolf cub? He said, feeling a scrabble of paws and a thrusting muzzle, like, a little dog with his nose looking for a pet. Eska had turned away to strike flint and steel and kindle the lamp. The tiny flame sank and then sprang up and steadied, and in the dazzle of yellow light he saw a very small gray cub who staggered to uncertain paws, sneezing at the sudden light, and pushed in under his hand with the nuzzling thrust of all very young things. Eska came back to the cot and dropped on one knee beside it, and as he did so Marcus noticed that there was a hot look in his eyes, a brightness that he had not seen there before, and wondered with an odd sense of hurt if his return to bondage from a day and night of freedom was the cause. In my tribe, when a she-wolf with whelps is killed, we sometimes take the young ones to run with the dog pack, Eska said. If they are like this one, little, so that they remember nothing before, so that their first meat comes from their master's hand. Is he hungry now? Marcus asked as the cub's muzzle poked and snuggled into his palm. No, he is full of milk and scraps. Sastika will not miss them. See, the cook. See, he is half asleep already. That is why he is so gentle. The two of them looked at each other, half laughing, but the queer hot look was still in Eska's eyes, while the cub crawling, whimpering into the warm hollow of Marcus's shoulder and settled there. His breath smelled of onions, like a puppy. How did you get him? We killed a she-wolf in milk. So I and the two others went to look for the whelps, the babies, the cubs. They killed the rest of the litter, those fools of the south. But this one I saved. His sire came. They are good fathers, the wolf kind, fierce to protect their young. It was a fight, aye, a good fight. It was taking a hideous risk, Marcus said. You should not have done it, Eska. He was half angry, half humbled that Eska should have taken such a deadly risk to know what the hazard was in robbing a wolf's lair while the sire still lived, the father. Eska seemed to draw back into himself in the instant. I forgot it was my master's property that I risked, he said, his voice suddenly hard and heavy as stone. He's saying, I risked my life, but I forgot that when I do that, it's no longer my life. I'm risking your property. see, sorry. If you hear, I think my baby's awake, but he didn't go down too long ago, and I think he'll fall back asleep soon. But there's not too much long in the chapter, so. Don't be a fool, Marcus said quickly. I didn't mean that, and you know it. There was a long silence. The two young men looked at each other, and there was no trace of laughter now in their faces. Eska, Marcus said at last, what has happened? Nothing. That is a lie, Marcus said. Someone has been working mischief. The other remained stubbornly silent. Eska, I want an answer. The other moved a little, and some of the defiance went out of him. It was my own fault, he began at last, speaking as though every word was dragged out of him. There was a young tribune, one of those from the transit camp, who I think is taking troops up to Iboracum. A very splendid young tribune, smooth as a girl, but a skilled hunter. He was one of us who went into the lair, and after the old dog-wolf was dead, and we had come away, and I was cleaning my spear, he laughed and said to me, that was a noble thrust. And then he saw my clipped ear, and he said, for a slave. I was angry, and I let my tongue run away from me, and I said, I am a body slave to the centurion Marcus Flavius Aquila. Does the tribune Placidus, that was his name, see any cause therein that I should be a worse hunter than himself? Eska broke off for a moment, drawing a harsh breath. He said, none in the world, but at least the tribune Placidus's life is his own to hazard as he wills. Your master, having paid good money for his slave, will not thank you for leaving him with a carcass that he cannot even sell to the knacker's yard. Remember that when next you thrust your head into a wolf's lair. And then he smiled, and his smile is a sickness in my belly still. Eska had been speaking in a dull, hopeless monotone, as though he had the bitter lesson by heart, and as he listened, Marcus was filled with a cold anger against the unknown tribune, and the light of his rage suddenly made clear to him certain things that he had never thought of before. Abruptly, he reached out his free hand and grasped the other's wrist. Eska, have I ever, by word or deed, given you to believe that I think of you as the 6-month soldier evidently thinks of his slaves? Oh, is that have I ever made you think that I think of you the same way that that guy was treating you does? Eska shook his head. His defiance was all gone from him, and his face in the paling lamplight was no longer set and sullen, but only wretched. The centurion, Marcus, is not such as one as the tribune Placidus, to show the whiplash without need to his hound, he said drearily. Marcus, baffled, hurt, and angry, suddenly lost his temper. Oh, curse Tribune Placidus, he burst out, his grasp tightening fiercely on the other's wrist. Does his word strike so much deeper with you than mine, that because of it you must needs talk to me of hounds and whiplashes? Name of light, do I have to tell you in so many words that I really do not imagine a clipped ear to be the dividing line between men and beasts? Have I not shown you clearly enough all this while? I have not thought of equal or unequal, slave or free in my dealings with you, though you were too proud to do the same for me. Too proud, do you hear me? And now, forgetful for the moment of the sleeping cub, he made a sudden movement to get onto his elbow and collapsed again, exasperated but half laughing, his fury gone like a prickled bubble, holding up a bleeding thumb. And now your gift has bitten me. Mithras, his mouth is full of daggers. So the little cub, nipped him. Then you had best pay me a Circes for the lot of them, said Eska, and suddenly they were both laughing, the quick light laughter of breaking strain that had very little to do with whether or not there is anything to laugh at, while between them on the striped native blanket the small grey wolf cubs crouched, savage, bewildered, but very sleepy. The household varied a great deal in their reactions to the sudden appearance of a wolf cub in their midst. Procyon, the dog, the old wolfhound, was doubtful of the first meeting. The newcomer had the wolf smell, the outland smell, and the great hound walked round him on stiff legs, the hair on his neck rising a little, while the cub squatted like a hairy, malignant toad on the atrium floor, ears laid back and muzzle wrinkled in his first attempt at a snarl. Uncle Aquila scarcely noticed his arrival, being at the moment too deeply absorbed in the siege of Jerusalem. And Markippor, the house slave, and Stephanos looked at him rather askance. A wolf cub that would one day be a wolf roaming at large about the house? But Sastika, the cook, was unexpectedly an ally. Sastika, her hands on her hips, told them roundly that they should be ashamed of themselves. Who were they, she demanded shrilly, with 2 sound legs apiece, to begrudge the young master a pack of wolf cubs if he wanted them? And she finished her baking in a state of high indignation, and presently brought Marcus 3 brown honey cakes in a napkin, and a chipped bowl of castor ware with a hunting scene on it, which she said he might have for the little cub's feeding pole. Marcus, who had overheard her championship, she had a loud voice, accepted both gifts with becoming gratitude, and when she had gone, he and Eska shared the cakes between them. He no longer minded Sasissa quite so desperately as he had done at first. Probably because he's not so lonely and grumpy anymore, now that he has someone his own age to talk to. A few days later, Eska told Marcus about the days before his ear was clipped. So he's finally opening up. It's good. They were in the bathhouse when it happened, drying themselves after a cold plunge. The time that he spent in the plunge bath each day was one of Marcus's greatest pleasures, for it was big enough to splash about in and swim a few strokes, and while he was in the water, unless he was very careless, he could forget about his lame leg. It was a little like his old sense of being born from one kind of life into another, that when he had been used to know in his charioteering days. But the likeness was the kind that a shadow bears to the real thing, and this morning as he sat up on the bronze couch, drying himself, he was suddenly sick with longing for the old splendor. Once more, just once more, to know that burst of speed as the team sprang forward, the swoop and the strength of it, the wind of his going singing by. And at that moment, as though called up by the intensity of his longing, a swiftly driven chariot came whirling up the street beyond the bathhouse wall. Marcus reached out and took his tunic from Eska, saying as he did so, "Not often that we hear anything but a vegetable cart in this street." "It will be Lucius Urbanus, the contractor's son," Eska said. "There is a back way from his stables which comes through behind the temple of Sol Minerva." The chariot was passing the house now, and evidently the driver was having trouble, for the crack of a whip and the loud burst of swearing reached them through the bathhouse wall, and Eska added with disgust, "It should be a vegetable cart, and drawn by an ox. Listen to him, he is not worthy to handle horses." Marcus pulled the fold of fine wool over his head and reached for his belt. "So Eska is a charioteer," he said, fastening it. "I was my father's charioteer," Eska said, "but that was a long time ago." And suddenly Marcus realized that he could ask Eska now about the time before his ear was clipped. It would no longer be walking in without leave, because he had kind of opened up the door himself by starting the conversation about it. He shifted a little, making a quick gesture toward the foot of the couch, and as the other sat down, he said, "Eska, how did your father's charioteer come to be a gladiator in the Khaliva arena?" Eska was buckling his own belt. He finished the task very deliberately, and then, locking his hands round one updrawn knee, sat silent for a moment, staring down at them. "My father was a clan chieftain of the Brigantes, lord of 500 spears." It's about one cohort. But obviously they don't do, cohorts in Britain. He said at last, "I was his armor bearer until such time." So he was right. Marcus is right. He had been his armor bearer. An armor bearer is someone who, helps support giving all that is needed to whoever he's being an armor bearer of. "I was his armor bearer until such time as I became a warrior in my own right, with the men of my tribe. That happens after the 16th summer. When I had been a year or more a man among men and my father's charioteer, the clan rose against our overlords for the lust of freedom that was in us. We have borne a thorn in the flesh of legions since first they marched north. We, the bearers of the blue war shield. We rose and we were beaten back. We made our last stand in our strong place, and we were overwhelmed. Those of the men's side who were left, they were not many, were sold as slaves." He broke off, jerking up his head to look at Marcus. "But I swear before the gods of my people, before Lu, the light of the sun, that I was lying for dead in a ditch when they took me. They would not have taken me else. They sold me to a trader from the south, who sold me to Beppo here in Khaliva, and you know the rest." "You alone of all your kin?" Marcus asked after a moment. "My father and 2 brothers died," Eska said. "My mother also. My father killed her before the legionaries broke through. She wished it so." There was a long silence, and then Marcus said softly, "Mithras, what a story." It is a common enough story still. Was it so very different at Isca Demnanorium, do you suppose? But before Marcus could answer, he added quickly, Nonetheless, it is not good to remember too closely. The time before, all the time before, that is the good time to remember. And sitting there in the thin March sunshine that slanted down through the high window without either of them quite knowing how it happened, he began to tell Marcus about the time before. He told of a warrior's training, of river bathing on hot summer days when the midges danced in the shimmering air, of his father's great white bull garlanded with poppies and moonflowers for a festival, of his first hunt and the tame otter he had shared with his old elder brother. One thing led to another, and presently he told how, 10 years before, when the whole country was in revolt, he had lain behind a boulder to watch a legion marching north that never came marching back. I had never seen such a sight before, he said. Like a shining serpent of men winding across the hills, a gray serpent hackled with the scarlet cloaks and crests of the officers. There were queer tales about that legion. Men said it was accursed, but it looked stronger than any curse, stronger and more deadly. And I remember how the eagle flashed in the sun as it came by, a great golden eagle with its wings arched back as I have seen them often stoop on a screaming hare among the heather. But the mist was creeping down from the high moors, and the legion marched into it, straight into it, and it licked them up and flowed together behind them, and they were gone, as though they had marched from one world into another. Esca made a quick gesture with his right hand. The first 2 fingers spread like horns. Queer tales they were about that legion. Yes, I have heard those tales, Marcus said. Esca, that was my father's legion. His crest will have been the scarlet hackle next after the eagle. So, his slave knows about the 9th Legion, the Hispana, that Marcus's father was in. Alright, y'all have a good day.